This is Kyle, and this is another episode of He Said, She Said. Laura, it's been a while. How you doing?
I am great. It has been a while, and I think we need to kick this up a little bit
All right, so tell me what you're thinking about.
about do relationships, long term, partnerships and marriages, do they make us complacent?
I'm sure a lot of
It's the
people,
old, fat and happy or happy and fat kind of thing.
I'm sure a lot of people, i.e., a lot of women, have an opinion about that.
I'd say men probably do too.
So, I think the immediate answer is yes. I think it's almost impossible in some ways not to. We'll get into this in a moment. I wrote an article sometime back, this has been several months now, about that, and I titled that article, Why Men Change After Marriage. And I kind of teased out this idea, which quite frankly, it seemed to have put a lot of the blame on men, but I was writing it particularly for men, and that's
Right.
usually who I write to anyway, so that was why it was framed as it was. But I look at it like this. Well, we'll get to that in a moment. Yes, I do think that they change. I do think it's almost impossible not to become somewhat complacent.
And here's the thing about that. If you notice complacency, what do you do about it? How do you make sure that it doesn't happen, and how do you kind of open the dialogue in said relationship so that there's a commitment to not being complacent?
Well, I'll tell you what, we'll use real world. So,
Okay.
as you know, me and the Queen are getting married next summer.
Yep.
And this is arguably one of my bigger fears. Okay? We've been together for over 5 years, so it's easy to become complacent. But I also know that we don't live together. So there are days where we do not see each other. So, when we've been a day or two without seeing each other, it's always fresh and new when we get back together. So we're going to miss out on that aspect. We're going to eliminate that. So one of the biggest fears is getting into a rut.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and because we've had it so good for so long, and it's a fear that I have, and I don't know if she has it or not, but we've talked a little bit about it. But I can only own, Laura, my piece of that, right? And so we'll get into now the article that I wrote. When couples date, all right, particularly from the standpoint of a man, part of the whole dating aspect is that he is pursuing her. He pursues her from the moment he first sees her across the room and thinks she's beautiful and wants to go talk to her. He pursues her the first time he wants to have sex with her. It's a constant pursuit from the moment that they meet all the way through, even up to including marriage, right? I mean, he is pursuing her to these certain stages in the relationship, whatever they may be. Women love that. They're drawn to that. Women grow up with the white prince, on the white stallion, and he's pursuing her and protecting her. And for better or worse, I think women are somehow trained into that type of mentality. So men set a precedent, right? He's pursuing her because he wants to achieve certain stages of the relationship.
Right.
When they get married, what's there to pursue?
And I am so fortunate that this is someone who thinks that the sun rises and shines on me, and I know that, and in some small way, well, there's a couple of things. In some small way, I feel like there is nothing, like he's going to feel that way always. So, the load is off. I don't have to, work so hard at that. And so that's the complacency I worry about. So for us right now, the kind of complacency conversation that we're having is kind of around the fat and happy thing, is kind of around the self-care and the, I don't want that co-pursuit to stop. I don't want him to stop trying to woo me over with, his goods. And I don't want to stop wanting to do that for him. Part of it is for myself because it's the way I feel, and I think with all of my work with women and divorce and marriages that have not panned out well, I have seen a serious lack of attention, personal attention on bringing your A game when you are living together, married, going through going through a lifetime of, the good and the really not so good. And I think it's really hard. And Drew and I have been together, it'll, be 7 years this fall. And we kind of had a little pinky swear this morning that we are going to we're gonna kill this complacency thing off. We're gonna really, work a little bit harder to support each other to bring our A game.
For better or worse, I think that so many couples, whether they're dating or married, feel that to be intentional, to pinky swear in a relationship, that just feels weird. That feels very businesslike. That feels very, non-spontaneous, right? It feels very rehearsed. I think that people feel weird because we never see that on TV. We never see that in the movies. It's always the last minute and everything is so spontaneous. Unfortunately, it's hard to maintain spontaneity without a plan.
Right.
You can't be spontaneous unless you have a plan. I want to refer back to something you had mentioned a moment ago. So, not only have you and Drew decided that you wanted to be intentional about it, and you're going to be intentional, but you made the statement earlier, though, that he considers the moon rising and setting, right, on you, and that you said you did not feel that you had to work so hard for that anymore. I would argue that you have to continue to do that.
I agree.
Yeah.
And that's what brought the conversation is that I've been looking at myself a little bit lately, and it's like I was at my peak of like self-care and, my woohoo when I was in the dating mode. It's just that's you kind of do. And I'm good. I don't want to put out the impression that it's not good, but I definitely can notice sometimes I'll just use a simplistic example. Oh, I don't have to go to the gym this morning. It's not a big deal. So what if it's a little bit softer than it used to be? Like, it's fine. He adores me. And yet I'm very conscious and intentional about saying, I don't want to go down that road. This is really important for me, not only because ultimately it's how I feel about myself, and everything I project within our relationship is an extension of how I feel about myself. So I know enough to know that, but it's also, you're right in saying, I want support on that. I want to bring my A game all the time with him, and I want him to want me to do that.
You talked about the A game. I just thought about this. When we're dating, we need to bring our A game. Because if we don't bring it, we don't have anything. When we get into a relationship in general and a marriage in particular, we have to want to bring it.
That's right. Choose to bring it.
And I think bringing it when you're bringing it to the same person every day gets a little bit difficult, and it's very easy to say, to your point, it's no big deal, but to your point again, if you begin to head down that path, you get far enough down the road, it's very, very difficult to come back, right? And we have to be very careful of that. And once again, it goes back to what we talked about. We have to be intentional about the fact that, hey, listen, the things that I've done is what brought me to this point. I now have to continue to do that, just like working out, right? You can work out hard for 3 months and get yourself in great shape. Once you're there, you're like, I've made it. It's like I'm here. And then all it takes is a couple of weeks of not doing it, and it's gone.
Right.
No different.
Right. And you know what I think happens? And it's always a very difficult conversation for me to have with women who have let it get too far, let's say, because then the inclination and the, I guess, it becomes the, you're supposed to love me, he's supposed to love me no matter what, no matter, right? There's that whole justification of why do I have to do or be something that maybe I'm not,
Well,
or risk the love
my,
thing.
my, my response to that would be, were you that person before and while you were dating him?
Right.
Yes. So why do you think you should not be that person now?
Right.
It's the great bait and switch.
Right.
I can tell you right now, Laura, every time I'll see someone at the gym, and I'll just use the gym reference. They're at the gym like every single day, working their tails off. Sure enough, they're single or divorced, one or the other. You'll see them for like 4 months and they are just killing it every single day. And then all of a sudden, poof, they disappear. And you see them out in town and you introduce them to, they're like, oh, this is my new boyfriend or girlfriend. They've got someone, they're in a relationship, and all of a sudden it stops. It's the great bait and switch. It's universal. It's as old as time.
I think it's a huge thing. And I think sometimes what happens is I think that we justify certain things by saying he or she is no longer doing that for me, or he or she doesn't love me because they're not doing that, or instead of, I think there's a fear around having that conversation, opening that door. I'm going to go way out here and say that I think sometimes people would rather jump to, I want something else, rather than I need to have a conversation so we can bring this shit back.
Because it's almost easier.
Yeah.
It's almost easier to say goodbye than to fix what you have. And that's sad.
It is sad. And then I said this to one of the women that I'm working with, one of my clients the other day. I said, she said, oh, my husband will never change. She's going through a divorce. He'll never change. And I said, let me tell you, I have seen more men pull out their A game after divorce and their ex-wives going like, what? like holy crap. And we don't give ourselves a chance sometimes, I think, in our relationships to pull our shit together and really show up.
I would argue there's a little bit more to it than that. I hate to say this, it sounds so cliche, but I wrote an article about that, called Why He Changed After You Got Divorced. And I'll just say this, and we can talk about it in a different episode. It's the anvil and feather, right? Women like to communicate using a feather. They like to drop hints and innuendos. When it comes to men, they need to usually have an anvil dropped on their head before they get it. And that's usually what divorce is. They drop an anvil on their head and they're like, oh crap, my world is just turned upside down. I've got to begin to fix things. When she's beating herself upside the head saying, I was telling you these things 6 months ago. Yeah, but you were using a feather when you should have used a sledgehammer. You asked earlier, how do we talk about that? And I used myself and the Queen as the example. I think you have to admit your fears, right? I think that the moment that you begin to sense complacency in yourself or the other person, you have to bring it up. What you can't do, though, Laura, is you can't say you. And here, once again, it's like the two most dangerous words in any relationship, by far the most dangerous. If you want to kill a relationship quicker than anything else, use the words in the same sentence, you never.
Yeah.
You never. It is an absolute, and it says two things. First, it says that you're keeping score. And second, it says that all you're focusing on is the negative and you're never going to recognize the good the other person is doing. So what you can't do, and when you begin to notice that complacency, you've got to bring it out. And really what you need to do is use yourself. And you go to your partner, you go to your spouse, you say, let me ask you a question. Have I been getting lazy?
Yeah.
Have I been doing the things that I used to do when we were dating or when our relationship was new? Do you still feel the same way? Do you still feel as if I'm trying as hard as I used to try? I find this, that when you talk to people and you open up the conversation about the things that you're doing wrong, it invariably begins to register with the other person, and you don't ever have to go to them and say, you haven't been doing this in a while, because they'll usually, if they're halfway intelligent, now bear in mind, a lot of people aren't, but if they're halfway intelligent, they're going to recognize that this requires a bigger discussion.
And that's kind of how it happened. Our little pinky swearing episode it really was that way. I said, and there'd been this kind of conversation about getting back, because we had a long distance relationship, and then he moved home, and so now we're back together again, and there were certain habits that I got back into, not bad ones, when he wasn't around. And now that he was home, it was easier not to get up and go to the gym in the morning. It was easier to hang out with him and have a cup of coffee or do whatever. And I want to do what I need and want to do, because ultimately it is my commitment to me, but also my commitment to us. It's my commitment to not being complacent. But I started to talk about it in that way, like that it's something I really needed to stop kind of making some excuses, and I needed to step up my game. And it was Drew really who said, you want to do this together. You want to bite this bullet, together and make some commitments. And I was like, yeah.
If it was only always that easy.
Yeah, and sometimes it can be. But then again.
But you got to get to it early enough.
I was just going to say.
Wait until you hate each other to bring it up, right? Because at that point, you've gone way too far down the path, and it's already what we talked about. Once you go down that path hard enough, it's almost impossible to come back without a lot of hard work and a lot of change. And you got to see yourself heading there. Oh, I got to back up, because this is not where I'm wanting it to go.
I totally agree. And I'll tell you something. The single strongest commitment or revelation or whatever you want to call it that I made after my divorce was that I would be hyper, reactive is the wrong word, but hyper responsive to any feeling of, like, until today I hadn't really used the word, but complacency. And I was never, I used to frame it as I was never going to accept even the slightest bit of mediocrity. But I think complacency is an even better word to describe, like, the commitment that I felt like I had to make, because I had let things go so long in my marriage that, of course, there was no way back. But I agree with you wholeheartedly that it's about tackling it early on. But most people don't feel justified, and I don't think they actually think about it like this.
Final thoughts.
Man, kill off the complacency early, like huge. Make it part of an ongoing conversation in your relationship. That's my parting thought.
Two things. First, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Prepare yourself for it in the beginning. Whether it be a long-term relationship or whether it be a marriage, complacency is going to sneak in. And then secondly, have a plan. I'm going to write an article called "You Can't Be Spontaneous Without a Plan," because I'm absolutely convinced now that is the case.
It's true.
Have a plan. Have a plan of communication. Have a sit down once a week and say, what have I done this week that upset you? What things do we need to talk about? The conversation may not last more than 3 minutes, or it may end up being 3 hours.
Right.
Be intentional about it. Spontaneity is only in Hollywood, okay? It's not in the real world.
I agree.
Laura, until next
Yeah.
time.
Shoot.
Yay.